Okay, so China built entire cities before the people showed up. Apartment towers stood finished beside 6-lane roads. Streetlights came on every night. Government buildings, schools, parks, museums, and shopping centers were already there. Then the camera pulled back, and the most important part of the city seemed to be missing: the people. That image became one of the most famous symbols of China's property boom. The obvious explanation is that officials guessed wrong. Developers built too much, buyers stayed away, and an enormous amount of money ended up trapped inside empty concrete. Sometimes that is close to the truth, but it leaves out the part that makes these places economically strange. Some of the apartments were already sold. Some of the roads and public buildings were already being used. Some famous ghost districts later gained large populations, and several people in the chain could receive their money long before enough residents arrived to make the streets feel alive. So the real question is not simply why China built empty cities, it is how a city could look empty while land was being transferred. Apartments were being purchased, mortgages were being issued, contractors were being paid, and local governments were still calling the project growth. And underneath that is an even harder question. What has to keep flowing for all of that construction to become a real city before the money runs out? Start with one family standing inside a property sales center. In front of them is a polished scale model: tiny apartment towers, tiny trees, tiny cars, a school in one corner, a shopping street in another. The roads are clean, the parks are green, and every building is exactly where the brochure says it will be. Outside, the real district may still be half construction site and half empty road. The family is not necessarily buying a finished home. They may be buying a promise, a future apartment, a future neighborhood, a future school district, a future increase in value. And during the boom, that did not automatically feel reckless. Property had become one of the most important stores of household wealth in China. A home could be for a child, for retirement, for a later move, for access to education, for rental income, or simply because years of rising prices made waiting feel dangerous. This is the first distinction that matters. An apartment can be purchased before it is occupied. It can even be purchased before it is finished. China's developers commonly used presales. A buyer signed a contract, paid a deposit, arranged financing, and waited for the building to be completed. Deposits, advance receipts, and mortgage-linked payments became an important source of developer liquidity. That arrangement made rapid construction possible. It also created a risk that was easy to ignore while sales were strong. The apartment could produce cash before it produced shelter. The buyer had a contract, the developer had funding, the bank had a mortgage customer, contractors had a project. But the family still did not have keys, and the district still did not have residents. Now look through the window of that sales center. There may be rows of towers outside, but the phrase ghost city still does not tell you exactly what you are seeing. One building may be finished but unsold. Another may be sold, but mostly unoccupied. Another may be occupied only part of the year. A fourth may be unfinished after the developer ran into financial trouble. A nearby commercial block may be complete, but unable to attract tenants. From a drone, all of them can look like the same failure. They are not. That is why national claims about a precise number of ghost cities or empty homes need caution. China has no single official ghost city category. Researchers have used census records, mobile location data, nighttime lights, electricity use, business listings, and satellite imagery to estimate vacancy or urban vitality. Each method measures something different. A dark window is evidence of low activity. It is not a complete financial history. The more useful definition is simpler. These were places where urban capacity arrived much faster than the people, businesses, and daily routines expected to use it. And the reason anyone believed those people would eventually arrive is that for decades they really were moving. Around the year 2000, roughly 36% of China's population lived in urban areas. By the 2020 census, that share had risen to almost 64%. By the end of 2025, it was almost 68%. With roughly 954 million urban residents, that is not imaginary demand. It is one of the largest urban migrations in history. Hundreds of millions of people needed homes, roads, power, water, schools, hospitals, offices, factories, and transport. A district that looked oversized in its first year could become crowded later. Building before every resident arrived was not automatically irrational. In a country urbanizing that quickly, waiting until demand was visible could mean building too late. But national migration does not move evenly. People do not relocate into a percentage. They move towards specific jobs, schools, hospitals, relatives, factories, universities, and transport links. A family may accept a smaller apartment near a dependable income rather than a larger apartment in a place with no reason to stay. This is how empty housing and expensive housing can exist in the same country at the same time. Housing is fixed in place. Demand is not. An unused apartment in a weak inland district cannot be moved beside the jobs of a stronger coastal metropolis. A new tower may be cheap, but if the resident has to travel hours for work, if the school is not ready, if the hospital is far away, or if local services depend on a registration status the family does not have, the cheap home becomes expensive in every practical way. Go back to the family in the sales center. They are not only asking whether they can afford the apartment, they are asking whether everyone else will come too. Will the supermarket open? Will the bus run often enough? Will employers move nearby? Will the school become desirable? Will the developer finish on time? Will another buyer want this unit later? They are buying a home, but they are also making a bet on thousands of strangers. And while that family is deciding, the local government is making a different bet on the same district. Urban land in China is state-owned. A local authority does not normally sell city land as permanent private freehold. It transfers time-limited land use rights for a specified purpose. The developer pays for the right to build, receives permissions, puts up the project, and sells the apartments or commercial space within that structure. The legal detail matters because it turns land development into part of local public finance. Picture one parcel at the edge of a city. Before development, it may be low-value peripheral land. Then the authority changes the plan, assembles the site, extends roads, power, water, and sewage, and places the land use rights into an auction. The developer is not paying only for dirt. It is paying for permission, infrastructure, location, and the expectation that future buyers will pay more for the finished property. The local government receives money from that transfer. Roads and utilities can raise the value of nearby parcels. Those parcels can then be transferred to additional developers. One transaction can help make the next one possible. For many local governments, land transfers and financing supported by expected land values became an important source of money. One widely cited academic analysis estimated that land sales and land-backed financing represented about 38% of local government revenue in 2019. Although the dependence varied greatly from place to place, that number sounds like income. Here is the part the number hides. The payment can arrive once. The district keeps sending bills. The road needs repairs. The streetlights need power. Water systems need pumps. Parks need maintenance. Schools need teachers. Public buildings need staff. Debt service continues whether the apartments are full or not, and the land payment is not pure profit. Preparing the site, relocating existing users, extending infrastructure, and funding public facilities can consume a significant share. But while developers keep bidding and property prices keep rising, the system can keep moving. The next parcel helps support the next phase. That is why an empty road can be more dangerous than it looks. The problem is not merely that nobody is driving on it. The problem is that the city may already be paying for a road built on the assumption that the next land buyer, the next developer, and the next household will eventually appear. Now the family signs the contract. Their money enters a developer that may be building several projects at once. The developer has land payments, suppliers, contractors, interest, sales offices, and completion deadlines. During the boom, continued presales allowed that machine to keep moving. Money from current buyers supported current construction, and in some cases the wider pipeline of obligations around the business. Again, this does not mean every developer misused buyer funds, or every project was dishonest. Presales were a normal part of the system, and rules governing those funds varied by place and period. But the economic dependency was clear. The developer needed confidence in future delivery, and the buyer needed confidence that the developer would. The system and rules governing those funds varied by place and period. But the economic dependency was clear. To still be able to finish, the family had to trust not only the building in front of them, but the sales that had not happened yet. Then there is the city outside the apartment, which has a problem no single building has. A completed apartment can be used by one household. A completed city needs thousands of separate decisions to reinforce one another. Residents want shops, schools, transport, healthcare, and jobs before they move. Businesses want residents before they open. Employers want workers who are willing to live nearby. A bus route needs passengers, but passengers need useful destinations. A school can attract families, but it needs teachers, public funding, and enough students to justify the entire operation. This is why low prices alone do not fill a city. Imagine 10,000 apartments. 8,000 have buyers, but only 3,000 are regularly occupied. On a sales report, most of the housing may look sold. On the ground, the supermarket, bus line, school, clinic, and restaurant are serving something much closer to 3,000 households. A sales office experiences the contract, a city experiences the resident. That gap is where China's most famous ghost city entered the story. Kangbashi is a new district of Ordos in Inner Mongolia. It was developed during a period of rapid regional growth connected to energy and mineral wealth. The plan included housing, government offices, cultural buildings, schools, roads, and large public spaces. The municipal government moved there in 2006. Construction came quickly. Daily life did not. Around 2010, contemporary figures placed the population near 28,000, although exact early counts depend on the boundary and the definition being used. 28,000 people is not nobody, but against the scale of the district, it could feel like nobody. The images were almost designed for television. A huge civic plaza with barely anyone crossing it, apartment towers beside broad roads with little traffic, monumental public buildings standing in a district that seemed to be waiting for the city to begin. Kangbashi became evidence for a simple story. China had built a city, the people had rejected it, but a city does not fail or succeed on the day the concrete dries. The government had moved offices into Kangbashi, that created jobs and daily trips. Prominent schools gave families a reason to relocate. Public facilities created destinations. New residents made stores more viable. More services made the district easier to choose. The government was not waiting passively for urban life. It was trying to create the first anchors that could pull the rest of the system into place. That strategy can work, but it is not free. Public employees may commute rather than move. A school can attract families while still depending on government funding. Moving an institution can make one district busier by making another less important, and none of it automatically proves that the original cost, debt or planned scale was justified. Still, Kangbashi did not remain at its early population. The 2020 census counted 118,796 permanent residents in Kangbashi district. Streets became busier, schools and neighborhoods gained ordinary activity. The most famous symbol of permanent emptiness became substantially more inhabited. That is a real reversal. It is also where the story becomes more uncomfortable. Because if Kangbashi gained people, then the early cameras were not showing a final result. They were showing a delay, and delays were something the wider property system had learned how to finance. By this point, follow the money one more time. The local government prepared land and transferred development rights. The developer paid for those rights and began construction. Buyers signed contracts. Before completion, their deposits and mortgage-linked payments helped support the project. Contractors, suppliers, and workers were paid. Rising property prices made ownership feel rewarding even before the apartment was occupied. Strong sales encouraged more land transfers and more construction. The roads could remain quiet while all of that was happening. This is the deepest reason ghost cities could exist for years without immediately stopping the machine. The system did not wait for one finish line. The buildings could be completed on one schedule. The transactions could be completed on another. The city itself had to be completed on a third. The physical city was the towers, pipes, roads, schools, parks, and public buildings. The financial city was the land transfers, mortgages, presales, contracts, debt, and rising asset values. The lived city was the family receiving the keys, finding work, sending a child to school, shopping nearby, taking the bus, and deciding to remain. Several participants could succeed in the financial city before the lived city proved itself. The local authority had the land payment, the developer had the sale, the bank had the mortgage, the owner had an asset, but the grocery store, transport system, maintenance budget, and local service economy still needed the person who actually moved in. That was the central bet behind building ahead of demand. Not that every apartment needed a resident immediately, but that urbanization, income growth, and rising values would keep the financial system alive until the human system caught up. Kangbashi shows that sometimes people do arrive. It does not prove the waiting was cheap. A district can gain population and still fall short of earlier ambitions. It can become useful without earning an acceptable financial return. It can support schools and government offices while remaining dependent on public spending. Occupancy answers one question. It does not answer every question. And the entire strategy becomes far more dangerous when the financial system loses its ability to wait. Around 2020, Chinese authorities began constraining excessive developer leverage. Property sales weakened. Major developers faced serious liquidity problems. Potential buyers became more cautious, especially as unfinished projects made the risk of non-completion visible. Now picture the same family entering the same sales center, but in a different market. The model is still polished. The promised school is still on the brochure. The apartment may even be cheaper, but the family has seen projects delayed elsewhere. They know another buyer may not appear at a higher price. They know the developer needs continued sales. Buying early no longer feels like getting ahead. It feels like becoming the next source of cash in a system under pressure. So they wait. One family waiting does not matter much. Millions of families becoming cautious changes everything. Fewer presales mean less cash for developers. Less cash makes completion harder. Fear of non-completion makes buyers even more cautious. Weaker sales reduce demand for new land. Lower land demand reduces local land transfer revenue. That makes it harder to support infrastructure, services, and old obligations built during the expansion. The boom moved forward through confidence. The slowdown moved backward through doubt. In 2024, local government land sale revenue fell 16%. Real estate development investment fell 10.6%. The amount of completed commercial floor space listed for sale reached roughly 753 million square meters. That last figure is not a national vacancy count. It does not include every sold but empty apartment, and it does not prove that every square meter will remain unused. It shows something narrower and still important. An enormous amount of completed property was waiting for a buyer even after the market had already weakened. In 2025, real estate development investment fell another 17.2%. At the same time, the total national population was declining while the urban population continued to rise. China was still urbanizing, but future demand was becoming slower, more geographically concentrated, and harder for weaker locations to capture. This changes the risk of building first and waiting later. During the fastest phase of urbanization, time could rescue an oversized district. More residents were arriving somewhere. In the new environment, every district has to compete more aggressively for a smaller and more selective flow. The buildings do not care. They still need power, security, repairs, roads, water, and public services. Debt still matures. An unfinished tower can deteriorate. A completed apartment can remain unsold. A public plaza can be beautifully maintained while contributing very little to the revenue needed to maintain it. The concrete is already there. The future demand is the part that can disappear. China has tried to change what some of this empty capacity is for. In 2024, the central bank created a 300 billion yuan relending facility intended to support purchases of completed commercial homes by local state-owned enterprises for use as government-subsidized housing. Authorities also expanded tools for dealing with idle land and existing obligations. That can solve real problems. A completed apartment that private buyers do not want may still become useful affordable housing. A project that stalled may be worth completing for families who already paid. Replacing expensive or short-term debt with more manageable obligations can give local governments room to breathe. But there is one thing a financing program cannot move: the apartment. If the home is near jobs, transport, schools, and services, a lower price or a new use can bring people in. If it is far from opportunity, changing the owner's name does not create a reason to live there. This is the test that separates a delayed city from stranded capital. A district built ahead of demand can work when the demand is real but late. It needs jobs inside the district or reliable access to them. It needs schools, government institutions, universities, hospitals, or employers strong enough to attract early residents. It needs services to grow with the population, and the financing has to survive the years when the roads, utilities, and public buildings are operating below capacity. Most importantly, the city eventually needs recurring human activity to replace recurring dependence on new construction. That is where the weak version breaks. Access to them. It needs schools, government institutions, universities, hospitals, or employers strong enough to attract early residents. It needs services to grow with the population. Developer stops buying land. The local authority loses a large transaction. Infrastructure costs remain. Buyers become cautious. Presale cash falls. Completion becomes less certain. Businesses see fewer customers. Families see fewer reasons to move. Each part makes the next part weaker. Go back to the family holding the brochure. At the beginning, the apartment looked like the product. It was new, physical, and easy to point at. But the family was never buying only concrete. They were buying access to a future network of jobs, schools, services, transport, neighbors, and buyers who had not arrived yet. Go back to the opening road. The towers are finished. The streetlights are on. The landscaping is maintained. The visible question is still, where is everybody? The economic question is whether the district has merely been built, whether it has merely been sold, or whether enough people now use it every day to support what was built around them. Those are three different achievements. China became extraordinarily effective at producing the first. Its property system became extremely powerful at producing the second. The ghost cities appeared in the distance between those two achievements and the third. Some districts, including Kangbashi, gained enough institutions and residents to become far more alive than the early images suggested. Others remain weak because the people, work, and recurring revenue never arrived at the assumed scale or speed, and when property confidence weakened, the cost of waiting became much harder to hide. China's ghost cities were not simply cities with no people. They were physical cities built on the belief that transactions could keep moving until human life caught up. The buildings were finished first. The real city was the part still under construction.